In 1947, in a room somewhere in occupied Japan, a deal was made. No cameras, no reporters, no record that would ever see daylight for decades. On one side, American military intelligence officers. On the other, a Japanese general who had just overseen the torture and murder of at least 12,000 human beings. They shook hands.
At that exact moment, the world was watching Nuremberg. Nazi doctors were in the dock, being tried, being sentenced, being hanged for conducting experiments on human beings without consent. The world told itself, never again. But in Japan, the men who had done worse were already negotiating their freedom. His name was Shirō Ishii, and America wanted what he had.
In Manchuria, China, in 1936, they built it. 6 square kilometers, more than 150 buildings, labs, operating rooms, a crematorium, its own airfield. Its official name was Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. A water purification department with a crematorium. 3,000 personnel worked there, Japan's brightest medical minds, its finest engineers. And at the center of it all, a prison full of people they had already stopped thinking of as people. Ishii was not a monster who looked like one. He was brilliant, charming, a microbiologist who had studied in Europe, toured Western laboratories, read everything. He looked at the 1925 Geneva Protocol, the international ban on biological weapons, and did not see a moral boundary. He saw proof that bioweapons worked, because why else would the world ban them? He went back to Japan and told the military he could build something they had never imagined. They gave him a blank check.
The victims were called Maruta. In Japanese, it means logs, timber, raw material to be cut and burned. They were Chinese civilians, political prisoners, resistance fighters, Russians, Koreans, men, women, and children dragged from their lives and delivered to Pingfang. The cover story for the facility was that it was a lumber mill, so calling the prisoners logs was not just dehumanizing, it was a dark, deliberate joke the researchers made to each other every single day. No one who entered as a Maruta ever left. If you survived one experiment, they used you for the next one, until there was nothing left to use. They wanted to weaponize plague, cholera, anthrax, smallpox, so they infected living people and watched. They timed how long incubation took, measured how fast the body failed, noted the exact moment organs shut down. And when they needed to see the internal damage clearly, when they needed to observe what a disease was doing inside a body in real time, they did not wait for the patient to die. They operated while the patient was still alive. No anesthesia, fully conscious, organs removed one by one. A surgeon named Ken Yuasa later confessed that this was not exceptional. He called it routine. The Manchurian winters were brutal. Temperatures dropped far below freezing. Unit 731 saw opportunity. They marched prisoners outside, had them submerge their arms and legs in ice water until the flesh froze solid. A physiologist named Yoshimura Hisato would then walk along the line, tapping frozen limbs with a wooden stick. He was listening for a particular sound, the hollow knock of frozen meat, like striking a block of wood. That sound meant the experiment was ready to proceed.
Then they would thaw the limbs and study how the rot set in. They needed to test their weapons, so they used people. Prisoners were tied to wooden stakes in open fields. Plague bombs designed to spray infectious fleas were detonated nearby. Researchers in protective suits stood at a distance and took notes. Others were locked inside pressurized chambers until their eyes burst from their sockets. Some had their stomachs surgically removed and their esophagus attached directly to their intestines. Some were spun in centrifuges until their hearts stopped. Women were forcibly impregnated to study how disease and trauma affected a developing fetus. There are no known surviving infants from those pregnancies. Conservative estimates put the death toll inside Pingfang at 3,000. Former members of the unit say the real number is closer to 12,000. And that is just inside the facility. In the field, Unit 731 unleashed its bioweapons on Chinese cities and villages. Plague outbreaks, cholera epidemics. Some estimates put the civilian death toll from those attacks as high as 580,000 people. When Japan surrendered in August 1945 and Soviet forces advanced, Ishii gave one final order: destroy everything. The facility was dynamited. The remaining prisoners were killed, their bodies burned, their ashes dumped in a river. Ishii and his staff vanished, taking with them the one thing they believed was still worth something: their data.
American intelligence found Ishii quickly, but they were not looking for him to punish him. The Cold War was beginning. The United States had its own biological weapons program at Fort Detrick, Maryland, but it had limits, moral limits, legal limits, human limits that Unit 731 had never observed. Ishii's team had spent years conducting the kind of lethal human experimentation that no Western program would touch. They had crossed every line, and they had data that no ethical scientist could ever replicate. America wanted it, and Ishii knew exactly what that was worth.
At first, Ishii played dumb, claimed ignorance, denied everything. He was a careful man. But he also knew the Soviets were hunting him. He knew what Soviet justice looked like, and he knew that between two superpowers who both wanted him, there was a deal to be made. He offered everything: thousands of autopsy reports, tissue samples, documented results from years of human experiments, the complete archive of what had happened inside Pingfang. All of it in exchange for full immunity, for himself and for every researcher who had worked under him. The proposal went to the highest levels of the American government. The documents that survive, now declassified, show that American officials knew exactly what they were doing. One memo from 1947 described the Unit 731 experiments as, and this is their own language, atrocities of the most heinous character. They wrote that, and then they approved the deal anyway. The same memo argued the data was of the greatest value to the future U.S. biological warfare program. The fear that the Soviets might get it first was enough. Justice was set aside. Ishii walked free, and American officials actively worked to keep Unit 731 out of the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal entirely, blocking witnesses, classifying evidence, making sure the story never reached open court.
Shirō Ishii was never arrested, never charged, never stood in a courtroom. He died in 1959 of throat cancer, a free man in his own home. The doctors who had performed vivisections on living human beings returned to Japan and built careers, senior roles in medical schools, presidencies of pharmaceutical companies, positions inside Japan's Ministry of Health, while at Nuremberg, their Nazi counterparts were hanged.
For decades, Japan said almost nothing. Unit 731 did not appear in textbooks. The government maintained what historians call official ambiguity, neither confirming nor denying, simply letting the silence do its work. It wasn't until the 1980s, 40 years later, that journalists and historians began forcing the story into public view. In 2002, a Tokyo court finally acknowledged that Japan had waged biological warfare in China. In 2018, Japan's National Archives released the names of 3,607 Unit 731 members, the first official, undeniable proof of who was there. Japan has still never issued a formal apology. The victims' families have never received compensation. The silence was never fully broken, only chipped at.
Here is the detail that should make you sit back in your chair. After the deal was made, after the immunity was granted, after 12,000 people had been tortured and killed and their names erased from history, after all of that, historians who later reviewed the Unit 731 data concluded that much of it was scientifically worthless, poorly collected, methodologically unsound. The experiments had been conducted with such brutality and so little scientific discipline that the results couldn't be reliably used. America traded justice for data. And the data was garbage. 12,000 lives for nothing. That is the true crime of Unit 731. Not just what happened inside Pingfang, but what happened after, when the world looked at what those men had done and decided it was acceptable, as long as the price was right.
The victims of Unit 731 were silenced twice. First by the men who killed them, then by the governments that chose to forget them. They had names, they had families, they had futures, and they were reduced to a single word: logs. This is not ancient history. The men who made this deal were alive within living memory. Some of the scientists who conducted these experiments died with honors and titles and no record of what they had done attached to their names. So tell me in the comments, was this a necessary decision for national security? Or was it the moment America proved that human life has a price? Because the answer to that question didn't just shape 1947, it shaped every moral compromise that came after it. This is the Dark Chronicle files, the files they never wanted opened. Subscribe, because there are more.